Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Atara Margulies, and I am the project manager for the Silver Spring Downtown and Adjacent Communities Plan. This is our third Chat with a Planner event in the series that we're doing this May. This one is going to be about affordable housing, and presentation and discussion is going to be led by our housing planner, Lisa Gavoni. And with that, I'm going to let Lisa get started. We've got a brief presentation and then we'll be having a discussion. You can feel free to put questions in the chat during the presentation if you want. Otherwise, it won't be long and then we can have a nice chat. Lisa, go ahead.
Thanks, Atara. Do you want to mention anything about the plan timeline before I jump in, or?
Oh, sure. So for those of you who have not been to any of our previous events, we've been doing this for just about a year now. We kicked off last June, and we, after an extensive existing conditions analysis phase where we gathered all the information about where Silver Spring is today, we moved into our visioning phase starting this March, and we've been doing online events, and there's been stuff on our website for the last few months. Had, I think, about between 150 and 200 people participate in the online live stuff so far, and this includes tonight's event, and then we've got one coming up on Thursday night. After this, these events close in May, we will be moving ahead to work, put our heads down and do some work and write the draft plan. And we will be sharing that in the fall, both with the community and at the planning board. And that will sort of kick off a public process at the planning board where there's a hearing and there's a series of work sessions, and then the plan goes from there to the county council, and we do the same process over again there. And we anticipate that this plan will not be approved before the summer of 2022. And then any zoning changes proposed in this plan get enacted by a totally separate process at the county council, and that would happen in the fall of 2022. So we still have some time ahead of us, but we're sort of, excited to be nearing the end of our visioning process and getting ready to actually start writing the plan. And so if anybody has any questions about the plan or any other subject about the plan, aside for affordable housing specifically, which we'll talk about tonight, we'll put the plan website in the chat, and I'll put my email in the chat, and people should feel free to contact us at any time about absolutely anything related to the plan. Lisa.
Thanks, Atara. So good evening, everyone. My name is Lisa Gavoni, and I work on housing policy for the planning department. I'm pleased to be here to talk about one of my favorite topics, affordable housing programs in Montgomery County. Tonight's agenda will begin by going over key terms, an overview of affordable housing programs, some supporting data, and then hopefully we can spend some time really digging in with some questions and answers. So let's dive right in and start by defining some key terms that we'll be using tonight. One of the joys of housing policy, and then it's a lot of acronyms and a lot of jargon. So hopefully, if I don't explain something correctly, please put it in the chat. But the first word I want to define is area median income, or AMI. This is a term I'll use tonight, and bonus points for whoever counts how many times I say that. You'll get the prize of getting through this presentation. And it's basically housing policy's favorite word. Each year, HUD calculates the area median income for every geographic region in the country by using data from the US Census-based American Community Survey. The area median income is the midpoint of a region's income distribution, meaning that half of households in a region earn more than the median and half earn less than the median. And when we talk about affordable housing programs tonight and who that program serves, we often use AMI as a qualifier and use it to describe the income ranges that program serves. And when people use the term median family income, they're usually referring to income for a family of 4 at 100% AMI. In the Washington area, that median family income is about $126,000, which sounds like a lot. It sounds like a lot to me too. Income restricted housing is housing that is available at reduced or subsidized rent or sales price. These units have income caps that determine eligibility, helping low and moderate income families find affordable housing. Some income restricted apartments are owned by the county's Housing Opportunities Commission, which is our housing authority, while others are privately owned but meet requirements for income-restricted tenants. The Housing Initiative Fund, or the HIF, is a locally funded affordable housing tool that provides flexible loans and grants to help create and preserve affordable housing in Montgomery County. For it is our housing trust fund. Historically, the HIF has been supported primarily by revenue from a deed recordation tax dedicated to the county's rental assistance program and general appropriations. The HIF is administered by the county's Department of Housing and Community Affairs, and the HIF is used in a number of strategic and significant ways to advance virtually all of the county's affordable housing priorities. The HIF does things like extend the life of an Mpd that's expiring, assist in renovating affordable units, and assist in financing the production of affordable housing. Now let's talk about some of the affordable housing programs and who they serve. There'll be an emphasis tonight on county programs because that's what the county has a lot of control of and a lot of what we can do in a master plan, but I also want to speak a little bit about some state and federal programs too. I'll start with the category of households that is the hardest to serve, which is households under 50% AMI, which is around $60,000 for a family of four for income. Generally, we only meet their housing needs with financial subsidies. And the primary vehicle for rental assistance is the Housing Choice Voucher Program, or HCV, and which is administered by HOC, the county's housing authority. HOC currently administers vouchers which provide a rent subsidy to clients so they can afford safe and quality affordable housing in Montgomery County. The subsidy amount is based on a payment standard set by HOC, and a client pays no more than 40% of their income on housing. There are two main types of vouchers, project-based and tenant-based. Project-based vouchers are assigned to a specific building, and clients must reside in that building to receive assistance. Families with tenant-based vouchers can use their assistance at any home, apartment, or other private market residence that meet household requirements, safety standards, and rent reasonableness. In general, the family's income may not exceed 50% AMI. Also, about 30% of moderately priced dwelling units serve households under 50% AMI. And if you don't know what an MPDU is, we'll go over that extensively tonight. But in this context, HOC and other government agencies like HHS are allowed to buy or lease 1/3 of MPDUs in a building, and they can also use the HIF funding or other sources of funding to subsidize that rent further to meet lower AMIs. Lastly, federal agencies provide essential funds to county programs for the construction, acquisition, and renovation of housing for special needs populations. Most funds come from HUD through programs like the Community Development Block Grant Program, Federal Home Investment Partnership, the HUD 202 Supportive Housing for the Elderly, and the HUD 811 Supportive Housing for Persons with Disability. And at the end of the program, I'm going to show a little bit of data that speaks to the frequency of these programs and how they're used in Montgomery County and Silver Spring. Now let's talk about programs that serve moderate income households. We're going to spend a lot of time, like I said, talking about the MPDU program tonight, but a quick overview before we get to that is that the MPDU program is Montgomery County's landmark inclusionary zoning program that's been in effect for over 40 years. It's also a county-based program, and the Mpd law requires that developments of 20 units or more set aside between 12.5% and 15% of rental and for sale unit for moderate income households. Another tool to serve moderate and workforce income households is rental agreements. These rental agreements are often used in the county in conjunction with landlords and multifamily property owners to assist in the preservation of affordable housing units in the county. In many cases, rental agreements are entered in voluntarily because existing tenants and property owners need to address the specifics of future rent increases. Recently, they've been using the tool in master plans like Littonsville, Forest Glen, Montgomery Hills, and Veers Mill to address the loss of naturally occurring affordable housing in the event of redevelopment. Often property owners are given more density, and redevelopment is allowed in exchange for that. After that redevelopment, the property owner caps rents for a certain percentage of units at no higher than 80% AMI. And we talked about earlier about the HIF, the county's housing trust fund, when we define terms. Projects financed with the HIF can also create and preserve affordable housing for moderate income households, especially in regards to preserving MPDUs near their expiration. And finally, the low-income housing tax credit, or LIHTC, help cover the development costs of building affordable housing. They are awarded on a competitive basis to nonprofit and for-profit sponsors of eligible housing projects. Awards are based on the criteria outlined in the state's Qualified Allocation Plan, or the QAP, and recent changes to LIHTC allow for income averaging. So as long as the average gross income for the restricted units in the project does not exceed 60% AMI. So let's talk about my favorite affordable housing program, the MPDU program. First, the MPDU program, like I said, is the hallmark of Montgomery County's housing policy. And as far as master plans and affordable housing goes, it's one of the primary tools that we have that we can use in master plans to advance affordable housing. At the planning department, we don't have a lot of say over who gets tax credits or who gets HIF financing, but we do get to set MPD requirements and master plans. The Mpd Law was enacted in 1973 with the aim of furthering the objective of providing a full range of housing choices for all incomes, ages, and household size. The law imposes requirements on construction of affordable housing to meet the existing and anticipated needs for moderate income housing. The control period, or when they expire, is 99 years for rental and 30 years for for sale units. This was changed in 2004. And for the 30-year for sale clock, it restarts if someone were to sell their home within that 30-year period. Basically means that the rental and the for sale units are held in affordable controls for perpetuity. The Mpd program is what we call an inclusionary zoning program. The number and location of MPDUs are established during the land use and zoning approvals of new construction development and the preliminary plan of subdivision, which is something that requires planning board approval. The MPDU law requires 12.5% to 15% of all new units and developments over 20 units to be affordable to moderate income households, which is generally around 65% for garden style apartments and 70% for high rise and for sale products, which is around $80,000 to $90,000 a year in income for a family of four. The program provides incentives through an optional increases in density to offset the cost of construction to encourage the construction of these MPDUs. What that means is while we have a 12.5 minimum requirement for any development over 20 units, and any additional MPDUs that are provided above that 12.5% are offered what we call a bonus density. And what that means is, for an example, in Silver Spring, it has a 12.5% MPDU requirement. If a project would provide 15% MPDUs, you would get a 22% bonus density to allow the project to be a little bit bigger. You also can get additional height to build those MPDUs. So it's really an incentive program to build more than was the minimum. In 2018, the Mpd law changed to require 15% of MPDUs instead of 12.5% of MPDUs in places that we call high income planning areas. These are planning areas in which at least 45% of the census tracts have a median income greater than 150% of the countywide median household income. In 2019, this was about $110,000. I know this seems very complicated, but we do have a web map that can show you the planning areas and can show you the median household income around the county and what planning areas fit in. As you can see on this map, Silver Spring does not have a 15% MPD requirement based on their income, but that is something that we can talk about in this context of the plan. And that's something that I'd also love for feedback from anyone listening tonight, what they think. The Mpd program has been very successful. We've produced more inclusionary zoning units than any other jurisdiction, and that's a testament really to the county's commitment to affordable housing and also the relatively long lifespan of the program. The county has produced over 16,000 total MPDUs, but obviously some have expired before the law changed in 2004, and there's about 5,000 MPDUs currently under the control period. Given the high costs of living in Montgomery County, I think that's a testament that's something we can all share that understanding. The county also has a workforce housing program that we usually look for opportunities to build workforce housing in a lot of our commercial core areas like Silver Spring. On the picture, you see the building, the core in downtown Silver Spring, which has workforce housing units. Workforce housing serves incomes between a 70 to 120% of area mean income, which is about $90,000 to $150,000 for a family of four. The workforce housing program is optional. It's a voluntary affordable housing program for private developers. The county often requires workforce housing units as a condition of development related to the use of county-owned land for housing. The Darcy and the Flats in Bethesda is an example of that. It's just a little bit more of an incentive to use county-owned land and to build the county more affordable housing. The workforce housing program also helps increase the availability of housing in the county for public employees and other workers whose income cannot support the high cost of housing that is located near their workplaces in our commercial areas. We also have down payment and home ownership programs through both the county and HOC and the state, and they can help make home ownership a reality in high cost areas like Montgomery County. While not part of any affordable housing program, but still a very important housing resource is naturally occurring affordable housing. That's housing units that are rent at prices affordable to households earning no more than 80% of AMI based on unit and household size. This is about $100,000 a year for a family of four. These units are typically found in older buildings and buildings without a lot of amenities. There's a good picture of one, Falkland Chase in downtown Silver Spring is an example of a naturally occurring affordable housing development. NOAA units, they're not income restricted by government regulation and not defined in Montgomery County Code. And as such, they are prone to market pressures. What that means is, for example, if when the purple line comes in and there's increase in demand to live in a place like Silver Spring or Long Branch, we could see higher rents charged in response to that increased demand at these buildings. It also means that if we do a good job at adding housing supply, those units can have downward pressure on their rents, and they won't be able to compete with the newer buildings with higher rents. So what can a master plan do for affordable housing? Affordable housing implementation and master plans requires collaboration with DHCA, HOC, and our housing partners to achieve a shared vision. The master plans can set Mpd requirements for the entire plan area or just specific properties. For example, in an area like Silver Spring with a 12.5% requirement right now, the Planning Board and Council can approve to set a requirement or a recommendation for 15% MPDUs in all new development. We can also set site-specific MPD requirements that are a little bit higher than the plan number for MPDUs, or we can set workforce housing requirements. For example, in previous master plans like the Forest Glen Montgomery Hills plan, we've set master plan recommendations for county-owned land higher than the plan requirement for MPDUs, given our desire to capitalize on building affordable housing on county land. We can also require rental agreements in the event of redevelopment. I explained that concept earlier, but if we have a NOAA property that has met the end of its useful life and the property owner would like to redevelop to a higher density, we may ask the property owner to enter into rental agreements to preserve those naturally affordable rents after redevelopment. Previous master plans have also given priority to existing residents to return after redevelopment. The Veers Mail plan states priority should be given to existing residents for 2- and 3-bedroom units and the units under market rate affordable rental agreements. After redevelopment, we can also require certain bedroom mixes which usually similar to what is there today. In the Veers Mail plan, on a specific site that was asking to redevelopment, we required a minimum of 20% of the units be 2 bedrooms and 5% of the units to be 3 bedrooms to meet the needs of our families in our master plan areas. So let's take a look at a little bit of data, my favorite subject. So first, let's set the context by providing a look into our housing supply and how it's divided up, both countywide, and then we'll talk about Silver Spring. Overall, about 80% of the county's multifamily house is unrestricted, which means it's subject to market forces and there's no income restriction on it. About 26,000 of these market rate units rent for less than 65% AMI and are classified as naturally occurring affordable housing, which comprises 27% of the total multifamily housing stock. However, income restricted units make up over 40% of all Montgomery County units under 65% AMI, and 1 out of every 5 units in our rental supply is income restricted. This number, this 1 in 5 number doesn't include vouchers or even rental agreements. So this number is actually pretty high, is actually higher than 40%. The reality is we have a lot of affordable housing that isn't going anywhere, but we do need to think of new tools and ways to protect what we have and to build more housing to combat rising rents. And that's something we'll be looking at in the Silver Spring plan with your help. But regionally and nationally, our affordable housing numbers compare very favorably. For most jurisdictions, their naturally occurring affordable housing is most of their affordable housing supply. And that's true to an extent in Montgomery County, but not to the extreme as it is in most jurisdictions. Overall, the county has actually been gaining more income restricted housing than at a faster rate than it is losing. Most of the units that are being lost are Section 8 units within larger market rate properties and are hard to preserve, while most of the units being built are moderately priced dwelling units, our inclusionary zoning program. Since 2000, over 5,000 deed restricted rental units have been added to the county's inventory. And that's really a testament to, like, in 2000, the county began to implement preservation strategies very aggressively for the subsidized rental housing that was at risk for being lost. A series of tools and policies have been used often in tandem over the years to effectively preserve subsidized rental housing in the county. These efforts have preserved approximately 2,000 units from being lost. We have a strong preservation foundation in Montgomery County, but we will be looking at ways to build upon it because we know it's a really important issue and how important the naturally occurring affordable housing is to our housing inventory. The vast majority of our income restricted units come from the low income housing tax credit program. But since 2000, we're seeing most of the income restricted rental units are actually MPDUs. The low income housing tax credit is the primary vehicle to create the majority of the affordable housing in the country, and 90% of the affordable housing in the country has been built through the LIHTC program. And it's important to note this because our successes in building affordable housing outside of state and federal programs. But so why is this changing? Why are we seeing more MPDUs compared to LIHTC units? Part of it is declining state and federal resources, shifting QAP priorities. The Qualified Allocation Plan, or the QAP, details the selection criteria and application requirements for the low-income housing tax credit. In the current QAP, we are not as competitive as we would like to be for the competitive 9% tax credit. Also in 2000, our housing market in Montgomery County started to shift from that single-family dominated dwelling unit to more multifamily rental units. So we're starting to get more rental MPDUs than homeownership MPDUs, and this is a trend that we expect to continue. One of the other things that I think this highlights is that the importance of production as a preservation policy. MPDUs are a product of new development. We only get MPDUs in the event of new development, and by building more new market rate housing, we are ensuring that we are keeping pace with also building more affordable housing. So let's talk about affordable housing numbers in the Silver Spring downtown and adjacent community plan area. The Silver Spring downtown and adjacent community plan area has over 2,000 income restricted affordable housing units, almost 20% of the entire rental housing stock. The plan's area of affordable housing is primarily served by the low income housing tax credit, but with the amount of new development we're seeing a growing number of MPDUs in the plan area. So we have about 1,100 low income housing tax credit units, about 600 MPDUs, and 300 in other programs that we talked about earlier, like the 202 or HIF finance units. We also looked at all the rental units in Silver Spring and their affordability levels by AMI, and we see that affordability is very much tied to the size and the bedroom mix. with most studios and one bedrooms being more affordable than the larger units. We also generally have more one bedrooms and studios in the plan area, so that makes the rents a little bit more competitive. Over 65% of the units in the Silver Spring plan area are studios or one bedroom. So we're going to end this presentation, which I think highlights the strong affordable housing base that we're dealing with Silver Spring. So this is a map that shows the affordable housing units by planning area. The bigger the circle, the more income restricted affordable housing units that they have. And you can see that Silver Spring has more than any other planning area in Montgomery County, more than Bethesda, more than Wheaton. And that's just really a testament to the great work of our nonprofit partners, as well as the desirability of the Silver Spring area. Of course, we want more, and we'll be looking at ways to increase our supply in the Silver Spring plan, but I think we have a great baseline to work with. So with that, I'm going to end my presentation and open it up for questions. Tara, are you going to be my MC?
I am. Mike, go ahead, ask your question.
Thank you for the presentation. And yeah, I mean, as you probably know, agree on most of those points. Definitely want to see more housing built, more MPDUs, more affordable units, all that good stuff. And agree preservation of existing affordable housing is an important part of it. Could you speak a little bit to, I have two questions that are kind of related. One on finding the right mix of, I know MPDUs largely come about from new construction. I'm not one of these people, but there are quite a few people who I agree with on like everything else that have some concerns about the MPDU program, thinking maybe it distracts from more deeper affordable housing. I think it's still important because moderate income is still getting priced out of the county. But how do you make sure you're finding that right balance, make sure the inclusionary zoning limits aren't so high that they discourage development, that sort of thing? Sure. And the second question is for LIHTC or other more deeply affordable housing. How much of that is, to the extent the county can influence, I'd encourage them to, like we saw Mayor Bowser in DC proposed a very large increase in those units. How much of that is in our control versus state and federal and things what's the best way to push for that, I guess is my question.
Sure, so I'll start there. And that's been something that we've been struggling with for a very long time. Like I said, we're not as competitive as we would like to be for the QAP. Baltimore City obviously gets the lion's share of the low-income housing tax credit, 9%, just because of the levels of poverty that are there, and that's completely understandable. Something that we have been lobbying with and have been unsuccessful this far is to have a set aside for Montgomery County and Prince George's County that just speaks to our need here. And similar model to what Virginia has, they have a set aside for Northern Virginia, so they're not competing with the Tidewater region and Richmond. And I think that's something that we should emulate there, and it's something we're pushing for, but we just have not been successful yet. In terms of the MPDU mix and ensuring that it doesn't hurt new development, I think we have a couple of things going for us. I think one, we've had the longevity of the MPDU program where land costs have kind of settled because we've had it for over 50 years or almost 50 years. So I think that helps. I think we always have to look at ways to make it more flexible and respond to the new changes. We did a pretty substantial update in 2018 trying to respond to market conditions, especially for like high-rise condos that were just unaffordable and some problems that we had with senior housing and making sure the bonus density was a true incentive and that it wasn't something that no developer would take on. So I think that we just have to keep looking at the program. I think that we can look at models like, for example, like one of the things that we talked about in Thrive is like income averaging. That could be one tool that we looked at. The low income housing tax credit is already doing that. So what if we, instead of having 12.5 and 15 at 65 or 70, we have some at 80 and some at 50, so we can meet both that middle need and also the low income housing need.
Okay, Lisa, before I call on the next person, I'm going to read a question from Jane in the chat. Is there any way to preserve the LIHTC / other income restricted units that are set to expire?
Sure, we actually do use the HIF to preserve some of those units, and there are certainly ways. I think the the struggle we have with some preservation is when we get to like Section 8 units in larger buildings, because those are harder to preserve on a singular unit kind of basis. But there are ways to preserve. It's just preservation is hard. It's expensive. It's usually just 100% of financial contribution from the county's trust fund. So it is one of the more difficult things that we have to conquer.
Thanks. Somebody had their hand up, but they put their hand down. So, I think it's Brenda, and she got. Brenda, hopefully you're back with us. I think you had your hand up before. So let us know when you're able to ask a question. We'll give her a minute. Anybody else have a question or comment for Lisa? Yes, Catherine, go ahead.
Yeah. Hello. Hi, Lisa. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you.
So my question is related to actually both of the previous ones, and that is, what is the plan for more deeply affordable housing? Because that's one of the things that the MPDU program is not quite as good at. And it's something that like often preservation opportunities tend to target moving buildings from the private market into deeply affordable housing that way. And I know we've got a little bit of money, so I was just wondering if that's something that folks have been thinking about.
Sure. I think that's a great question, and you're right. The MPDU program does not traditionally meet the under 50% AMI. We have nonprofit partners that help buy down rents, and 30% of those MPDUs do serve under 50% AMI. But one of the struggles we have with the MPD program is a complete developer subsidy, where we don't want to, we want to make sure that private development is still happening. I would say that's something that, I was really inspired by Mayor Bowser's $400 million, and I wish we could have something similar to that, because I think, unfortunately, like, it is usually a financial strategy, and we just don't have as deep as pockets as DC apparently does by a lot. But I think that you're right, that there can be ways to target it with preservation, and we just haven't seemed to hit the mark, at least on the planning side of it, although I will speak kindly to what DHCA does. And we do have the right of first refusal that we've often used to preserve units, which allows us to match a contract of a building that goes up for sale, and then we can use it to promote affordable housing. So I don't have a great answer for you, unfortunately, unless it's deep pockets, but I think it's something that we're always struggling with, and always open ears to how we meet that need.
Yeah, I would certainly say, like, no one has solved that for real, and just learning more about what Montgomery County and the planning department specifically is doing on that front is really helpful, since it's one of the areas that I think needs more attention and focus from our policymakers.
I agree. I think, like I said to Michael, I think income averaging is one tool that we can look at. We haven't had success with really like getting that through yet, but I hope that it's something that we look at seriously in the future, because we also have a problem with just providing like units at 80% AMI market. So it could be a great way to meet both of those needs and not really have a change to the pro forma on it for a developer.
Great, thank you. Jane, you're up next.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you for the presentation. Could you talk a little bit about the current sort of like income breakdown of the plan area and how it's changed over time? Sorry if I missed that before in the presentation.
What do you mean by income breakdown in the plan area?
Like what are the incomes of the people who live in downtown Silver Spring right now? Do we have fewer people who make less than, I don't know, like 50% AMI than we did 20 years ago? Are people getting pushed out of Silver Spring, I guess, is the question that I'm interested in.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer off the top of my head, although I will say that when we did the preservation of affordable housing study, that Silver Spring was one of the areas that had like the most at-risk properties. And I think the purple line coming in kind of highlights that if that need isn't there now, that it will be in the future. I think that Silver Spring definitely has this, at least the, what are we calling it, not the CBD, the commercial core, has lower incomes. I know that it's because it's primarily renter too, and that's just one of the issues with you have a primary renter area. But I think that's an interesting question that we should look into for our own plan. Understanding is just like how incomes have changed, how the demographics have changed over time, and then figure out what that means for our affordable housing inventory.
So I
Thank
think
you.
actually, Jane, so Lauren, who is on the call as well, sort of in the background, who did our demographics research for our existing conditions, she did pull that information at the time. She's trying to find it to see if we can get the answer, the details. As I recall, one of the things that was most interesting, one of the reasons why we didn't put median income information in our existing conditions presentation is because the range of incomes was so great that we felt that it was, I think, a little bit misleading to say, oh, this is the median income, because actually it went from like here to here in terms of income in our plan area. There was such a tremendous range. But I think Lauren she did look at it, I think, over time. I think so. I think if she gets that information, she'll be able to chime in. And if not, we can certainly look that up after the presentation. Lauren, if you want to chime in, go ahead, or we can defer to later.
So what I am pulling up right now, I do have some information about the 2018 ECS data we pulled, but unfortunately I can't find easily right now the comparison from 2000. So maybe we can get back to you on that if that's
so
okay.
Jane,
Yeah, no, that would be great. I think, yeah, I guess part of the reason I asked that is because I know that there's been a lot of discussion about not having a net loss of affordable housing, but I think that another goal outside of no net loss of affordable housing could also be maintaining the like economic diversity of Silver Spring. And I don't know if that's really ever been a goal in any master plans before, but it seems to be that that's something really special about Silver Spring that we should seek to hang on to.
And that is absolutely, that is something we have been talking about internally as a team for quite a while, and it has certainly made it onto our list of sort of, things that we're going to focus on in the plan is maintaining that diversity. So we will see if we can get the actual numbers that reflect that. But, the takeaway I remember was that the economic diversity is pretty significant. Going back. Okay, Brenda, great. I'm glad to see your hand. I know your hand went down before, but I guess I'm glad you're back with us. Go ahead. Brenda, are you able to unmute? All right, I'm going to call on David, and Brenda, we're going to try and help you so that we can hear your question. David, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much, Atara and Lisa, for this really informative presentation. I live in the town of Somerset in Chevy Chase, and I'm part of the Equity and Inclusion Committee of the town of Somerset, and really trying to learn about housing from the standpoint of equity and inclusion issues. And the question I have really has to do with, and I know there's been a lot of focus on Silver Spring, and deservedly so, on Bethesda and Chevy Chase within the plan and the housing priorities, because I've been hearing a lot about MPDUs within Chevy Chase and Bethesda. There's been a lot of talk about the missing middle housing categories. And are those, excuse my ignorance, are those two distinct categories? And then what are we likely to see in terms of Bethesda and Chevy Chase within the plan? And because what we're seeing now, what I'm seeing around me is more construction of bigger and bigger single family houses, which seems to be really the opposite direction from everything that's being talked about tonight and everything that I've read in the plan. On the other hand, the zoning text amendment from Councilman Jawando has been criticized a lot, I guess, by the planning department as well as by a lot of my fellow residents around here in Chevy Chase. So that doesn't seem to be quite the answer yet. So can you enlighten me as to what is to be expected in my part of the county?
Sure. So the first answer is missing middle housing is not part of any income restricted program. It's an initiative that we're working on in recognition that we also need more market rate housing of more types to serve more households and more families. And certainly that initiative is ongoing. In terms of Bethesda and Chevy Chase, we just completed the Bethesda master plan. I didn't mention it here, but the Bethesda plan was pretty transformative in the realm of affordable housing. That was the first plan to really have a 15% legal requirement for MPDUs. We also have the Bethesda overlay zone, which is an overlay zone that covers the entire plan area, to have their different rules for MPDUs, and it's really done a great job. Bethesda's booming right now, and so when you see those cranes of those high-rise rental buildings, you can at least take solace that 15% of them are income restricted and serving households. In terms of Chevy Chase, I know that you guys are seeing a lot of probably tear down rebuilds, which is when they take more affordable starter home and tear it down and rebuild it as a McMansion that is out of reach for more people. And that's something that we're trying to look at through our missing middle initiatives and the attainable housing strategies. Is how can we make that McMansion maybe potentially 2 more attainable units, but certainly they're not part of any income restricted program. So that is not the focus tonight, but I'm more than happy to talk with you more about that if you would like offline.
I just put, there is a totally separate from the Silver String Plan, as Lisa mentioned, something called the Attainable Housing Strategies Initiative, which is not the focus of tonight's discussion, but Lisa is leading that effort and she's more than happy to talk to anybody about that effort. I put the website in the chat so people can check it out on their own time.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Brenda, we would still love to hear a question from you.
Okay, I'm back.
You. Great.
Okay, yes, thanks for telling me star 6.
Perfect.
My question was really about how much, if any, of this housing will be available for purchase for these families. I'm thinking if people are low income, about the only ways that people can build wealth is through, the ownership of property. So I'm just concerned about people just getting stuck in a rental environment where they're never able to purchase anything. So that was my question.
Sure. So if a for sale project comes online, even a condominium building, there are availability to purchase those units. So that's a great way. You don't build a ton of equity in MPDUs just because of the controls on the units. When we resell them, we want them to be affordable again. So you only get about a 10% increase, improvements increase, and a CPI U increase. But they are a great starter home option, and we will certainly be looking at ownership opportunities within the plan area, especially for condominium. It's something that we've actually heard a lot about. And also selfishly, I want one for myself because I live in a rental in Silver Spring.
Okay, well the other thing is I have a comment about Falkland Chase. Falkland Chase, that little building there, does have some amenities. There's a lot of green space there, and there are places for children to play. And I even believe some of those areas there had a history of Mrs. Roosevelt being involved in the construction of some. So we have a lot of really wonderful property here in Silver Spring, and I'd like to see some of it maintained. I'm concerned about our looking like, that Crystal City eventually.
That's a great point. I think very fondly of Falkland Chase. I think they're beautiful. When I say that they don't have a lot of amenities, I mean they don't have like what we're seeing in a lot of the new buildings, the granite countertops. But it's a beautiful property with a lot of open space that I think is very desirable. They have a very low vacancy rate and they're doing very well. So my comment was not meant to be a slight on Falkland Chase.
No, I understand. I just want to put in a plug for that open space because people do have children and children need to get outside and play. All right, I'm going to go back off on mute now. That's *6.
Thanks,
Yes.
Brenda.
We're so
Okay.
glad you figured it out. Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you, *6.
And I will say in Silver Spring, there are not just Falkland Chase. I think there are 5 different sort of garden apartment clusters that all sort of fall under that category that Lisa was discussing of sort of naturally occurring more affordable housing, right? Then that's something that we are sort of looking at all of those areas and considering the key role that they play in the housing stock right now. Any other questions or comments? I know somebody asked, we are able to provide the slides from this presentation. That's not a problem.
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Somebody brought up, yeah, we were just talking about condos. I've always been interested to learn more about why condos seem to be so difficult to build, and also why they all seem to be concentrated in South Silver Spring. I don't know if there's a reason for that or not.
I think, so I'm not an expert at this topic. From what I've heard is that the financing can be a little bit trickier than multifamily rental, which makes it a little bit harder. And also we just haven't built a lot of them, which makes them kind of an unproven commodity. I know when I always prefer, I don't know why I always use the Octave as an example, but it's a good example. But when they did their adaptive reuse project, they were talking about how, they don't have any parking, but they had to, they couldn't get financing without parking. So they had to say that little sliver in front was parking for them, which I think, highlights a little bit of how the financing difficulties of getting condos through. I think there's, also just issues with, like I said, like it's an unproven product, but I think it's a really good point. When we toured the Octave, they had said that they were going to use the second parcel to build another condo building because they had done a great job, or the product had sold well, but then that piece is ending, I think it's ending up being the HOC HQ, so I don't think that's going forward anymore. And I don't know what happened, but I agree. I think we need more condos. I think it's a great first-time home ownership opportunity. And I would like to pursue through the plan when we talk to developers and property owners, if that's potentially pushing for that, but we don't have a lot of say over that because even when we zone for multifamily, they can switch to rental to condo at any time in the process.
Carolyn, go ahead.
Let's see. Hey, sorry, hopefully you can hear me now. I just thank you for this presentation. Really appreciate all the great work your team is doing and the passion you have for this really important work. I was also curious about some of the questions that have been raised about condos, and agree that they're a great option for a lot of people. And can you explain what you were just saying, Lisa, about the parking requirements and who enforces those and why they're required? Because I think living in Silver Spring, there are like South Silver Spring or downtown Silver Spring, there's so many great options to be able to walk and use public transportation. So many. I'm just wondering what the requirements, where the requirements around parking come from. Thank you.
Sure. So the requirements, and I'm sorry if I misspoke, they weren't on our end. They were on the financing end of the project, where they were having trouble acquiring financing because the project did not have any parking. And I was just using it, to highlight that even a great project like that that sold really quickly, it had some trouble getting off the ground. But like I said, through this plan, we're going to look at those opportunities and try to figure out the barriers.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I didn't think that came from your end, but just curious where the. Yeah,
I'll just say that while I don't know about that particular example, in areas that are not well served by transit, right, not in a downtown like Silver Spring, there is an expectation from the market perspective, right, that if you buy a condo, it comes with a parking space, and I suspect that sort of that thinking, which is probably predominant in most of the condo market in most of the country, is something that may have contributed to sort of that making it difficult to get financing if you weren't providing it, because that makes the project seem like those condos aren't going to be as attractive. Of course, when you're located in a place like downtown Silver Spring, that shouldn't matter. And perhaps at this point, and as we move, that depends where you're getting the financing from and who your investors are and all that. So my guess is it had something to do with that, and that I think it is harder to get financing for condos, I think, than a rental, because when you're looking to build in a place where the market is predominantly rental, all the comps are there. You can prove that your project's going to be successful. Harder to do that. It's harder when there's not a lot of condos because you don't have those examples to point to when you're the developer trying to go out and get your financing lined up to start the project. That's my sort of non-expert guess.
Thank you both for your responses.
Mike, go ahead.
Hey, sorry, me again. One thing I thought about that sort of come up a few times in the visioning sessions, and some of the land use things that have come up here in other places. Can you speak to some about the need for? There's some disagreement about the amount of land zoned for more than single family that's needed. Like, I'll get a lot of conversations with people that they say we need more truly affordable housing and not more upzoning. But can you speak to at least my view, you need denser zoning to allow the opportunity for anything that's not a single family home, whether it be a dedicated affordable development like you have on Fenton and Thayer. Can you speak to if we have enough zoning there, if something like upzoning Woodside and Woodside Park would allow more opportunity for, affordable dedicated units there?
So when we talk about missing middle, we're mostly talking about, smaller infill projects that we probably won't see dedicated affordable housing MPDUs unless they're more than 20 units. And I don't think that's the type of project we envision there. So I want to be pretty clear with that. But I think you need both. Like, I think you can have the gentle density of more housing types in single family neighborhoods, and also upzone your commercial core to really provide an opportunity for denser housing where we need it, near transit. We recently did a residential capacity analysis study where we looked at where we have zoning capacity, and it's basically all concentrated in our commercial cores. It's only about like 5% of the land, but it holds like 90% of the county's capacity. And when you're, sorry, that's my cat. And when you're as built out as we are, you have to look at new opportunities, especially when you have changing when you have changing demographics. That's my cat, sorry. When you have changing demographics like us, then you need to build more types of housing.
And I'll just I'll add to that, Mike, to say that, and I think you probably heard me say this already. In our core in Silver Spring, we have 13 million square feet of untapped development rights, that have been sitting there. And part of our discussion has been with, developers when we talk to them about the sites that they have not developed, what about that site zoning has not push you to develop it. And a lot of times they're not looking for more FAR. A lot of times in Silver Spring, they're looking for more height, so they have more flexibility about how to spread out the FAR, for example. And that's we're taking that very seriously, like those comments, and trying to figure out, upzoning in Silver Spring is probably not broad. While that might be true on some individual parcels, broadly that does not seem to be the issue. We have a ton of square footage that's mapped base zoning. I'm not even talking about using optional method to get more of it to do extra things and give more benefits. That does not seem to be the issue here. So we meet with developers and property owners often to understand, and they'll say, if we only had X and Y, we'd be able to develop this property. And we are listening to all of them to understand what those things are, because in Silver Spring we have the situation where we have a lot of potential that hasn't yet been met. And part of our job as the people writing the plan is to figure out how do we tweak the zoning to incentivize them, to make it attractive, and what's the sticking point. And I'd say a lot of the conversations have focused on height. So we're trying to figure out, how that works, and that's not true everywhere in the plan, but in some places. And so I would say that's it. It's a little bit of a different problem here. I think when you look at, how do we get more housing and affordable housing on some of those parcels.
All right, thank you. It's helpful to know.
David, you're asking, is upzoning synonymous with taller buildings? Actually not necessarily. It depends on the size of the parcel. The way our zoning works in Montgomery County is in the CR zone, certainly you have what's called an FAR limit, and you have a height limit at the same time. So I don't have a diagram to show you what floor area ratio looks like, but it is basically taking the area of the site, right? So let's say you have a site that's 10,000 square feet and you have an FAR of 1 on the site. That means you're allowed to build 10,000 square feet. But how do you build that? Do you build it in 10 stories, but small floor plate so it goes up? Or do you have to fill out the whole, do you fill out the whole site and make it 1 story? And that's where the height limit comes in. If the height limit is, 100 feet, that probably means you can get anywhere from 8 to 10 stories, depending on what kind of building you're building. If your height limit is 40 feet, that's going to give you a much bigger, fatter building if you want to max out that FAR. And so the way we control the zoning for most of the CR zones, for the most part, is a combination of those two. So actually, when you get, if somebody's saying that there's a lot of FAR on the site, but not enough height, it's probably because they don't want to fill out the whole site. They want to have some open space. They want to shape the building. They want to allow some space for people to hang out. There needs to be, you don't usually build out the whole site. There's other site requirements, and actually it's not necessarily desirable to build out the whole site. So sometimes adding a little bit of height gets you a much better building because it allows you to have more flexibility with how to shape that building on the site. So we always are keeping those things in mind. And so actually upzoning does not necessarily mean taller. It sometimes just means that there's more flexibility as to what kind of building can be built there. Residential buildings their floors are not the same height as commercial buildings, right? I mean, the floor heights are different, and certainly different kinds of office buildings and different kinds of developments need different height in terms of, floor to floor height. So 2 stories is the same as 4 stories in a different building type. So it's not that simple. There's a lot of variation. And Brenda, the untapped development, there are numerous parcels in downtown Silver Spring that have very small buildings on them, but the zoning allows for a lot more development. We have some exhibits in our existing conditions analysis that we presented back in February that sort of looked at all the parcels where they were less than 50% developed in terms of, and so, you add all that together, it's a really lot of square footage. And a lot of those have really small old buildings on them that are opportunities to be redeveloped.
Well, that's interesting, but of course my ears popped up when I heard someone mention Woodside and Woodside Park, since I happen to live in Woodside Park. And one of the things that like I feel is every time people talk about changing something or that where they need to develop, the first place they look here is in this area, which I happen to love, rather than attempting to the extent possible to replicate the advantages that we have in this area. For example, it's green, it's cool, we have lots of trees. And I noticed that it's in the past, I know, but when these builders were getting permission for amenities, they really didn't exist. I mean, they called them amenities. If you call a stone, a cement seat looking at a parking lot an amenity, then there are plenty. But they did not actually put in, I think, the energy or the time to make things more attractive and more pleasant. And the last thing I'll say is that a lot of these people, the developers, especially that one Bazzuto, it seems like he has a cookie cutter development. And a lot of his buildings, I can't tell whether I'm in Prince George's County or, anywhere else. I mean, it's almost, I call it the subway design. I'm talking about the subway sandwich place where you don't really know where you are. So that's one of the things I hope that this plan, while you're talking and planning, can talk about amenities in a different way, not just, more than just people being big, having tall ceilings in a big apartment building. So
Sure,
I may be
yeah.
wrong.
In the master plan, we actually don't really talk about amenities inside buildings, and then we talk about public amenities, parks and walkable streets and open spaces that everybody can enjoy, and also civic resources. I mean, in a master plan, we don't really
talk about that.
We can't control what happens inside the buildings.
I know you can't control what happens inside the building, but also outside. Because a recent meeting I attended, they talked about this heat island effect, and it really is true in downtown Silver Spring.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and that's why we're really focused on, I think she talked about it last week, researching how to make the streets cooler and increasing, hopefully, more trees and, better, greener open spaces with more pervious paving. All of that is a focus of this plan. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Sandra, you had your hand up for a bit.
Oh, hi. Thank you for calling on me. I have just a couple of questions. Does Montgomery County have opportunity zone that is advocated for small developers, small minority developers? And that's the first question. And is there an area because I'm new to this area, Montgomery County have hub zone, which HUBZONE, hub zone, where there's an incentive for a business owner to have their business in a certain depressed area so that they could attract their workers? Those are the two questions. Yes, no?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm also a housing expert, so I'm not the best resource for small business. We can something that I
mentioned the small businesses because sometimes the small business owner will get incentive to go into an area and have their workers work in the area and have their offices in that area, and that will be the hub zone area. And I'm just asking if that's part of Montgomery County. Is there any area of Montgomery County that would?
Lisa, this is Mel. Most of downtown Silver Spring is an opportunity zone. Okay. And in fact, most of downtown Silver Spring is a hub zone. I can't tell you offhand what the boundaries are, but you can go to the SBA hub zone website and see what the current boundaries are for the hub zone. And I'm not sure where you see the opportunity zone boundaries, but it does cover most of downtown Silver Spring.
Okay, thank you so much. I just wanted to know that. Thank you. I appreciate it. I don't know who I'm speaking to, but thank you very much.
You learn something new every day.
Thank you, Mel.
I knew the opportunity zone because I know that when
Thank you, Mel. Thank you.
When we did the growth and infrastructure policy, I remember we talked a lot about Silver Spring being an opportunity zone and not having to pay impact taxes, but I knew that part, but I didn't know about the hub zoning. So thanks, Mel.
Jane has a question about parking minimums. So she's asking if in Silver Spring there are parking minimums, and I imagine you're asking, are there parking minimums when it comes to building residential? I'm assuming that's
Yes.
what you mean.
Yes.
Okay.
I know, so I don't think are there parking, I don't think so.
No, in the CB, it's different. Yeah, I mean, the zoning has parking minimums when you're not inside the
Right.
the zone, whatever the PLD, which is almost the same as the CBD zone, and so it's that's part of what the TMD and the PLD sort of manage in their management. And I wish I had a more specific answer for you, and I can get one, but it does not affect it in the downtown. It's different than if you were developing not in a zone, in a parking controlled zone, as you would say. So I don't think here that is not as big of an issue, but I think that getting to the discussion we had, why I think it's easier to develop a rental building here, possibly than a condo building, because there's different expectations for condo buildings than renter. Although there are plenty of, apartment buildings here that do have their own tenant garages, and then there are plenty of ways that you can purchase a longer term parking permit, right, to park in a county garage, and they do have people who purchase those. So there's a lot of options, but there's a lot of parking in downtown Silver Spring now, as I'm sure everybody here is aware. And that's something obviously that we're analyzing as part of this plan. We are sort of nearing our end time of 8:15, so I want to just be mindful of everybody's time. Does anybody have any final thoughts, questions about affordable housing or housing in Silver Spring for Lisa before we sort of wrap up?
And I can put my email in the chat if anyone has any questions.
Yes, and you should feel free to, in the beginning, I put our plan website and Lisa's email and my email, the chat, and here's Lisa's email again. And you guys should really feel free. We're here even when we don't have an event, and we're really happy to answer questions and talk to people and send you information. I think we totally have, if anybody wants the slides, you can email us and we'll send it to you. If you're not already signed up on our e-letter, which is the best way to find out what's going on this plan, you should do that. It's sign up on our website, but I'll also put it in the chat. We really don't send a ton of emails, but that's the best way to find out what's going on. And in terms of the next few things that are happening for this plan, we do have another chat like this on Thursday night, which is really about a little bit of a visioning session about the Ellsworth Place Civic Building Veterans Plaza area. And that's going to be our last public meeting during visioning. We will then be giving an update on June 3rd to the planning board, sort of a summary of everything we learned during visioning. So for those of you who participated in any of the visioning sessions, including this one, you'll learn a little bit more about what we sort of our own summary and a little bit of information about, where we think we're going in terms of plan themes and stuff like that. But it will be a pretty sort of high level briefing. And then, we'll be sort of communicating with everybody via the e-newsletter at some point over the summer about our progress on the plan and sort of, when we're going to be coming forward with draft recommendations in the fall. So that is pretty much what's ahead for us. And, I encourage anybody to reach out with further questions about the plan in any way.
Bye, everyone.
And I think that's it. I was just checking to make sure nobody had any other questions. All right, great. Good night, all, and thank you so much for joining us.